Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Bubble podcast. As you guys are very well aware, I am of the opinion that we are 100% in a financial bubble around AI, but I also believe that it is such a foundational technology that it is going to change our world. And so, in the sort of hopes of exploring another conversation of trying to understand really what's going on in the trenches, out in the corporate side of things, we have a very, very special guest with us today who previously was in those trenches herself on the corporate side. She left her job and in June 2025 started an AI sales infrastructure company out in Australia. And I'd love to know more about what's happening, because we hear a lot about what's happening in Silicon Valley. We hear a lot about what's happening in San Francisco. But I feel like that in itself is such a small filter bubble where a lot of these extraordinary technologies are being built, but the real world still does not have an understanding of what they can do. So with us today is Jenny Vo. She's the founder and CEO of Hera Digital. What it does, I'll let Jenny give us a brief about that. Jenny, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us on the show.
Appreciate the time, Muzza. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to our conversation.
So tell me a bit about what you do at Hera and what sort of markets are you servicing right now? What's the scale that you're operating in over the last 1 year?
So we're a little older than 1 year, but 1 year does tend to roll off the tongue a bit nicer. So we're almost 2 years old. We're not quite there yet. So
Nice.
we're basically just walking in the equivalent of toddler world. So to answer in your short, what we do is we build sales infrastructures for B2B teams. It's not really agnostic per se, but we do lean towards the more of the SaaS industry, because it's just something that's always evolving and something's always exciting, and who doesn't want something to be different every day? So that's where we've landed. We predominantly serve the North American market and the Australian market, more so leaning on 80% North American, 20% Australian, which kind of segues perfectly into what the market is like in Australia, but I'll dive deeper into that right after this point. And we're sort of operating about 6 headcount now, so we're doing okay. We're surviving. For a business that started 1 year and 7 months ago, I think we're doing okay. There's always room to grow though. So we do also particularly lean on the GTM and strategy space, because that is more strategic, it's more fun, it's more creative. And that's where we predominantly like to sit. But nothing's ever too small or too big for us to handle. We're just about conversations. Have the conversation. Where does it go? Can we help you? Can we not? We'll send you to someone else who can. And sort of just to head and finish off the Australian market component, the reason why we never entered it originally was the Australian market is still very, very reluctant. And I think that comes from an undereducated piece and or unaware piece, right? And maybe it's my duty as an Australian trying to implement AI into the Australian market. It is my responsibility to educate and allow people to become aware and therefore not so reluctant to adopt. But I hope that answers your question. That went in a very tangent in a very quick manner.
No, that makes sense. We're going to dive deeper into that as well. Your website headliner says build predictable sales systems with AI. So, I mean, sales systems have been built for as long as I can remember. And so that technically is nothing new. There's the with AI component that seemingly is everywhere these days, right? Do this with AI. And so I'm curious, what's the difference between the conventional sales infrastructure versus what is possible now with AI?
I actually like to challenge you on that perspective, because the AI piece now has actually become overused and oversaturated. It's more the predictability side that is actually the hard component. And I think from someone who's in the trenches from a corporate standing and now in the trenches serving the corporate industry, it's actually the predictability is always a piece that a lot of businesses actually struggle with, because it always starts with groundhog from ICP all the way to close. There's, as you can imagine in the sales pipeline, there's so many varying levels of, yes, there's levels of automations and workflows you can put in place, but that's not necessarily harnessing the real power of AI. Where AI is when agentic AI is actually applied to the pipeline. What does that actually look like? Now, when I think about AI as a tool, I think about it as a data analytics tool because my brain just simply cannot compute that level of information and data. So I then rely on AI tools to give me that data so I can make more intelligent decisions on behalf of my customers. So when we have a scenario when we're completely rebuilding or re-architecting a complete RevOps engine, we dive all the way back down to what we call an ICP magnification process. Now, where AI comes really handy is we can look at total addressable markets. We can look at what's actually obtainable for you. But additionally, how do you then apply that information to the rest of your funnel? And when we look at implementation and I guess architecture, is allowing AI, agentic AI specifically, to actually help with the nurture and the follow-up process. So with all the many conversations we've had with customers and prospects, there's always one or two issues that generally is the problem of a pipeline that is not predictable. One of them is a poor ICP. Secondly, it's poor follow-up. It's always a mixture of one of the two, or sometimes both. Now, I can't really dive in deep and tell you how to fix that because we would be here till tomorrow. But I wanted to share a really interesting stat, and I think this might be helpful for your audience. 69% of the pipeline dies at conversion due to the lack of follow-up. Isn't that nuts? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And then we think follow-up is really simple. But from someone who's actually sitting in the trenches, it's actually more than you think it is, because from a human psychology perspective, let's say, oh, Muz, hey, just reaching out to follow up. You don't respond for whatever reason. 2 weeks later, oh, hey, Muz, I'm following up. So it just feels monotonous to the salesperson. And it's actually a salesperson psychology perspective where they don't want to bother the prospect and lose the deal. So they just leave it, and the gap widens and widens and widens, and therefore it's not urgent anymore. So when we did some deep diving with this with a sales coach as a partnership and collaboration, we draw down the stats, and it was absolutely fascinating to find 69%. So even if you were to improve your conversion by 9%, which is hard to do, but if you can bring that down to 60%, that materially makes a significant impact. So, but also no one really likes follow-up. No one enjoys follow-up. Let's be honest, okay? So that's where we add an additional layer of AI systems and infrastructure to allow for the follow-ups to be automated, but automated in a human element way, because everyone can read AI slop, or they can tell that it's AI driven. So it still has to highly be personalized to that prospect, to that conversation, to actually make a difference. So yeah, that's pretty much that question in short.
No, that makes sense. But while, I mean, to me, the logic is very much there. It's an existing, it's nothing revolutionary in many ways. It is an existing business vertical that is now more efficient and more optimized courtesy of this new technology. What I'm curious about though is there a cost overrun to this that is more than what it was previously? Because if the cost versus the revenue increase has a higher revenue growth, it's a no-brainer. Like, why would you not go for AI? And so I'm curious why the transition has been relatively slow, particularly, let's say you mentioned earlier, in Australia.
I think the transition is particularly slow with Australia because I think people had just downloaded ChatGPT as a chat interface. So when I speak about AI adoption into the actual sales pipeline, we've had what now a 10-minute conversation, and we still haven't even really gotten into the crux of it, because it's not only do we have to sell, we also have to educate before we sell. What does that actually look like? Because AI is so, you can't feel it, you can't touch it. It feels intangible until they see results. So understanding that, we have to come from a perspective of, let's look at the outcome that it can actually give you and the upside, right? So if that returns a 4x on your investment to adopt AI, obviously it's a no-brainer. It's getting those persons to those conversations is actually the harder part. Now, with the Australian market, what's particularly unique, and I think more particularly unique within my state, which is Western Australia, is we are a very mining heavy state, which means it's not that we need more money, we need more operations and delivery. So then those conversations change quite drastically, because when we look at Hera Digital and what we do, we look at actually focusing on growth, not necessarily just the front end, although that's where we lean to because that's what we love. But growth means something different to everybody. And in the Australian market, particularly where I am, growth means allowing them to have more time back so they can think about growth. So I mentioned this earlier on in our chat is I spoke recently to more so leaning on the finance sector because it's quite heavily regulated. As you know, no matter where you are, it's very heavily regulated. And therefore, adoption is typically slower because of that regulatory body. Then when I spoke to these founders and owners, they said, look, I just don't know where to start. Look, there's so much going on. Regulations change all the time. We have to comply. I don't know where to start. And that therefore tells me it's an education piece, right? So with finance sectors, medical sectors, all the sectors that are heavily regulated are still, I would say, comfortably 10 years behind in adoption, because there's probably no one quite actively in the Australian market working on AI governance and actually implementation from a perspective of deploying it safely in a highly regulated environment. Which now I'm saying that out loud, probably something we should tab for later. But it's quite an uphill battle because you have to have so many things ticked off. You actually do have to get licenses as if you were practicing finance. So I can understand why not a lot of people have really taken it on. But if it's something that's actually going to genuinely help the industry learn and adopt AI, that's something we're not afraid to actually do. It's not for me, finance. I did finance for a bit, but it's not for me.
For a lot of people, they say, AI, or at least the commercial use of AI as we're seeing today, is sort of, as a technology, is very similar to, let's say, what cloud was, or what mobile apps were, in terms of how they accelerated a lot of development and productivity and so on. It's sort of similar to, let's say, the dot-com phase, where internet really changed the way that we worked, changed the way that our we were productive. Excel sheet essentially replaced rows and columns of finance workers who were just crunching numbers all day. I'm curious, was Australia always this slow in terms of adopting a lot of these technologies? Or is this phenomena exclusive to AI because of this sort of narrative that's there as well, where, AI is, it's you're going to end up in a surveillance state.
It's scary.
It's going to, it's a copyright infringement. There's a bunch of these different narratives around AI right now. And I feel like it's because I feel like the market has been pumped so much to gather that money for the data centers. The counter is also there with cloud and a bunch of other. It was just like, okay, whatever, it's a new technology. Who cares? The nerds are working on it. That's fine. So tell me a bit about transitions in previous technology revolutions
I
versus
think that's
now.
really serendipitous, Mars, because I literally just had this conversation yesterday with somebody in the Australian market on my podcast yesterday. And he was around, so he used to work for Cisco. And he was around for decades. And he said, essentially, what I gathered from that conversation was the exact same thing happened when the World Wide Web came about. Super reluctant. We don't know what it is, so therefore, let's just shut it out until it actually impacts what we need to do and how we do it. And he said, it's a wave and it will happen. It just takes a little bit longer. With the Australian market, we always joke because we're detached from any other country is we just get information slower, which obviously is not the case, but it's a running joke. But to answer your question in short, it is a natural Australian market behavior. So if you are looking to enter the Australian market, just have that in the back pocket. And I think the most valuable way to enter the Australian market is through direct partnerships, because unless you have that IP, I don't see the business lasting very long in the Australian market. There won't be much of a foothold because of you don't have that market knowledge and what people are actually on a daily basis. What are they reluctant to? What are they actually interested in? And how much of that does your business overlay?
Makes sense. So for me, there are two major threads here. First being that it does not matter how amazing a technology is and how much change it can make. Human behavior tends to be very, very anti-change. And so when people really imagine what 5 years later looks like with AGI coming in and everybody just sort of sitting at home and not working and universal basic income, they're imagining that the risk appetite and the openness to change that people in San Francisco have is the same all over the world, which more often than not isn't true. Majority of the world and much of the global south, I'm from Pakistan. A lot of countries, developing countries like Pakistan, they don't have a lot of technologies that have existed for the last 40 years, not because they couldn't afford it, just because there is this sort of resistance to change. And I think the same is going to happen with AI as well, where the transition is going to take its sweet time for much of the rest of the world. And so I'm curious on that first thread, do you see that transition based on what we're imagining in the mainstream narrative, what's happening on X? A new tool is coming out and it's talking about this is going to disrupt Hollywood, this is going to kill this industry, versus the real world impact. Do you think the timelines differ realistically when it comes to rest of the world?
Are you, just to clarify that point, are you specifically talking about regions and whether different regions are slower or faster to adopt?
No, I'm talking about a wider transition to a post AI world. It's just a world where a lot of our menial tasks are automated. Again, there are studies that say, oh, in the next 18 months, all white collar jobs will be automated. Now that's scary because it feels like, oh, I'm going to be jobless. But there is a difference between in a lab in San Francisco, theoretically a job is automated versus the actual job is cut down and replaced with an AI, I don't know, agent, right? So the actual real world implementation of AI, do you think the timeline is going to look completely different versus what the internet is making us believe?
Because of how fast the industry is going, I honestly have no idea what post even looks like. I don't think there is going to be post AI. I think AI will just constantly evolve to a point where it is going to be deployed more and more often. And I don't think deploying or with the any business that has the intention to deploy AI to replace humans, I don't think that's actually a smart business move. And this is probably going to be a bit contrary, but if we think about AI and its applications and how intuitive it's becoming, yes, it can make decisions and yes, it can gather data a lot faster than humans does, but it cannot feel, it cannot experience, it cannot express. And that's why when we look at personalizations, particularly when we're looking at sales functions, it's a very human function when we look at business silos. And if we were to run an A/B test where A being all AI only, B being only human responses, I can almost guarantee you will get more responses on channel B because it's more personalized. It's not polished. And I think humans now can identify that I'm actually genuinely looking for the unpolished. So, quick tip, if you are sending out AI automated messages or emails, actually purposely put through mistakes because that's how you can sort of pierce through. But what that tells me is eventually over time, naturally everything will have to correct itself because there's no equilibrium right now. So when I look at all the conversations and I reflect upon them and what we're learning in the actual trenches, if people are responding to mistakes or unpolished posts or unpolished messages or contact, that tells me that people are starting to become sick of hearing about AI, feeling AI, and experiencing AI as a receiving point. So it's starting to slowly correct itself already. But to answer the question from an enterprise level, I don't think businesses are genuinely trying to replace humans. I think if they are a good business, they're going to try to make their humans operate better output, and maybe they just don't need to hire the admin person because it just can't make those human emotional decisions Just to answer that in short, I mean, we're going on a tangent, and I can sort of philosophically say that for a long time, but we think eventually over time it will have to correct itself. And what that actually looks like is you might have to bring people back into the fold, humans back into the fold to actually operate AI safely. So,
Mm.
yeah, I don't know what the landscape looks like for this industry, but it's a wild ride. So, if you're someone that likes to not do the same thing every day, this is the industry for you.
No, that makes sense. I think one statement that really sort of speaks to me is when you mentioned where people are sort of sick of the AI being pushed on their face, so the novelty is beginning to wear off, and where a year ago it was the fear of missing out around AI which caught people's attention. Where you and I was looking at. I remember there was a Logitech mouse with an AI mouse, right? And I was like, okay, let's check this out. And it was literally a button that would open like a Chat GPT or something. But everybody had to have an AI something coming out. I think people are now beginning to get annoyed by that framing. And so for me, I think it's more important, and that's why when I started this conversation, I wanted to get a sense of what you're doing and how does AI sort of play a role there, because I feel like it's no longer about AI. It's about outcomes. It's about the fact that okay, I can generate the same outcome that you've been generating for the last 50 years. I can just do it either faster, cheaper, at a bigger scale, right? And that's what AI is supposed to do. Nobody comes in and says, okay, I'll make a mobile app for you, which is going to be around cloud and it's going to be this technology. They're going to say, we're going to make an app for you and you're going to be able to sell pizzas on your app to whoever, right? It's a very simple framing. It's an outcome based framing. Um, and so I'm curious. I feel like a lot of people, when they're still thinking AI, they're thinking the chatbot. They're thinking Chat GPT. They're thinking, okay, there's this. I'm going to say something, and it's going to intelligibly, with some sort of hallucination, return some sort of text um, to me. Whereas I feel like over the last 1 year, the entire ecosystem has changed fundamentally. There's been a bunch of, I mean, with just the MCP technology that's come in, and agents working with each other, there's now a lot happening, and much of the non-technical user has no sense of it. Give me your sense of, beyond your particular, let's say, AI in sales. You work with a lot of other partners as well. How are they using AI beyond the chatbot? And you know, how has the outcome changed? And just to give you a small context, additional, because towards the end of your last answer, you mentioned a lot of these companies might be hiring people back that they may have laid off earlier, or maybe hiring people back for different roles altogether. But we're now beginning to also hear that the cost of tokens that a lot of these companies, these big tech companies that laid off people, has far outpaced what those people were costing. And so even if theoretically it can increase their productivity, if the bottom line in the business doesn't make sense right now, it just doesn't make sense right now, right? And so a lot of these people, Microsoft recently said, okay, there's a limit to how many tokens we're going to give you guys, so on and so forth. Give me a sense of where we're headed now beyond the novelty factor of AI.
I think I think it's varying degrees based on business. So, because enterprise level is going to adopt a lot slower, a lot more carefully compared to, say, an agency. We can obviously move a lot faster, we can make decisions faster because it impacts less people. Now, when I look at, and it's funny, we actually went through this process on Monday, is we did a full analysis of the business, every single silo, sales, marketing, operations, delivery, retention, everything, right? And we're like, okay, let's look at the problems, let's look at the solutions. What can we automate? So it's an additional layer of conversation, but what's funny, when we did all of that breakdown, 6 times out of 10, I still prefer to human, because when it comes to human elements, yes, again, there is some tasks that can be handled by AI, but humans still, at the end of the day, prefer to talk to humans. And I had a conversation with my partner yesterday saying that they would prefer to wait on the line on the phone to talk to a human than an AI agent, which is fascinating. And I don't know whether that's an Australian particular specific thing, But that still tells me, one, again, the industry is overcorrecting, which is kind of nice. But one thing will always stay the same is humans will always prefer humans. And when we look at, well, if we were to replace humans with AI, you need to think about the cost, not just from a financial perspective, because when I started this on my own, it was very lonely. So if I was to start this same process with only AI agents rather than employees, I'd probably jump off a building, honestly, because it's such an incredible load. Like, can you imagine running a company by yourself? You have no one to talk to. It's all those small office chats that really make what you do purposeful. And then on the back end of purpose, if you're a business and you're prioritizing AI over employees, at the end of the day, what is your purpose on a really deeper level? And I'm sorry to go deep and meaningful on you, but when I think about business and all the business owners and founders I've spoken to, everyone has a purpose to some degree, and that is to serve another human in any type, shape, or form. And I don't think you can do that effectively with an entire AI team with the intention of replacing humans. Yes, you may have to pivot as an individual or an employee of what you do and how you do it, but the valuable part of having humans is actually the experiences that come with that human and the individual, because no two humans are the same. So if you think about it on that level, AI is exactly the same. Even if you give it the same, just a slightly different input or a question, and I give it the same question, it 9 times out of 10 will give us both the same answer. And that's what people are sick of, because there's just no flavor. It's just vanilla. No matter how much you try to add in, you try to add some chocolate sprinkles, rainbow sprinkles, some strawberries on top, it's still vanilla at the end of the day.
Makes sense. You mentioned early on, you said one of the ways to break through the industry and champion that education and change, because again, it's the transition is going to be fairly slow, particularly in enterprise, particularly in corporate. And so while it was popularized of a single person AI company is going to do everything and the AI agents are going to do everything, the fact is there are a lot of different people who understand different aspects of business, or champion different aspects of business. And so even if theoretically you have a swarm of agents who can do everything, practically we've all experienced that's not true. It gives you a semblance. It gives you a dumb person's understanding of what a particular vertical looks like, but it's not actually the real outcome. And so I'm curious, how do partnerships play in your own business model, when you're hoping to again educate and get new people to at least try out these new technologies and then potentially see whether they can generate an outcome that is more efficient, cheaper, faster, or at scale?
I think a good example there is our partnership with Noodle. So what they've done with the custom ChatGPT app space is, I think, quite clever and a very well-rounded offer, and I'll sort of get into that in a moment. And I keep saying this to the Noodle Seed guys, is like, I feel like I'm basically a salesperson for them because I just know the product and the service so well. And I just truly do. From the first initial conversations I had with some of the founding engineers, I truly did see the impact it could have. And I just wanted to champion that. So for me, importantly, is where the education piece comes from is, from a business perspective, if we were to individually go and make custom ChatGPT apps, it would be such a great learning curve that when you look at impact versus effort, it's quite low impact really because we don't understand it, but it's high effort. So for me, it wouldn't make sense commercially to go and do that on our own. So with having it's not really new, it's just something that is tangible to present to the market and say, hey, we know the market is going this direction. I have a solution for you. The barrier of entry is very low. There's no risk to you. There's no risk to your business. That is the best way that we've found adoption to be a lot more quicker and a lot more easier. because people are not willing to pay for something they don't understand, and AI comes from a quite a heavy perspective of that. And again, there is still quite a lot of an education piece. I think we do it every day now. I think I have a PhD in education in the Australian market at this point. But understanding that if you try to enter a market like Australia, where you have to educate before you actually can achieve some type of value or obtain some type of value, then it's fine. I think it's when you don't have that expectation, when you're like, oh, Australian market, according to ChatGPT or Claude, it comes back that it's a very viable market. But not knowing, because LLMs will not know that it's still the Australian market is still typically reluctant, right? So I think if you're prepared and you have a good understanding of the market you enter, then that's totally fine. But from an AI deployment side with partnerships is quite often we are the ones deploying AI for our partners and their clients rather than the other way around, which is kind of a nice place to be. But it also means that every conversation is very different and deployment is very different, because what they offer, how would that realistically work for their business, for them to on-sell? Because we look at partners and we look at channel partners where we're both helping each other from a sales perspective and we're both championing each other's product and service. So there's not a whole other, outside of Noodleseed, if I'm honest with you, there's no other partner that helps us directly with AI. It's more the other side. So we help them with AI. But I don't know whether that is because we're based in Australia or if it's because we just happen to have more conversations like that, or I don't know what it is exactly, but I'm not upset about the result.
I'm curious about this whole Noodleseed partnership, largely because I find Noodleseed to be at an interesting position, because if you take out the AI noise, and if you just look at fundamentally what the business is and what it's doing, it's a business that has always existed. Search has always existed. 800 million people are on this new form of search, which is using these chatbots. Previously, search was directly linked to websites, and so you would have these there was a WordPress boom, and that was a huge global boom. Like in Pakistan, government programs were there to teach you WordPress and get everybody to make a website, right? And then post internet, once mobile apps were there was the mobile app boom, where everybody was selling the idea that it come create a mobile app, and over time we saw everybody needs a mobile app, whether you're a store, whether you're a XYZ, whatever. And so it's a very logical transition towards the next step, where if your operating system is now driven by a chatbot as the first entry point to any digital interface, you need that the apps are going to be there, and those apps are going to eventually read out those customers to wherever. The problem though is that there's a chicken and egg, right? So right now you're really at, internet has just been invented and you're talking about WordPress, right? And that's a tough sell. It was easier to sell that in 2006 or 7, when the narrative was widespread. Everybody was rushing towards digitizing themselves, and so everybody wanted a website. How do you sort of deal with that sort of that chicken and egg, where the customer's like, okay, sure, we see this is happening, but is it happening today? I don't know. But you also need enough people to do it today for the ecosystem to be developed for it to really be something. Do you get what I'm saying? There's this,
Yeah.
yeah. How do you deal with that?
Particularly, I think with the GTM space, because in order for you to go to market, you must have a product, and if you have a product, it's generally it's something brand new, and it's exactly what you said earlier, is the chicken and the egg, and it's like a constant cycle, but it's a learning cycle, because if you truly believe that your service or product is actually genuinely there to help people and not for revenue, then you will start to prioritize your decisions differently. How does this impact the end user? What is the end user experience, rather than I just want to grow this business to 1 million ARR and then sell it, right? So it's two very different strategies. But what that means in terms of how does that look like in terms of longevity of business? And I think going back to it again, I think what is the common theme in our conversation thus far is actually, yes, there's a sprinkle of AI on top, but it really is about the humans at the end of the day.
Mm,
And that was the original reason why, quick plug, what I started my own podcast was because with all the noise, we don't accidentally bump into each other anymore. So there's no really by
mm,
means of networking anymore. You have to be proactive with networking rather than reactive.
mm.
And through those conversations, we've been able to meet the Noodle Seed team and create really amazing partnerships. And you cannot have that without conversation. So that's AI from a trying to replace humans perspective. It cannot replace those conversations. It just simply cannot. No matter how intuitive and intelligent it becomes, it cannot replace that human in conversations.
No, that makes sense. Jenny, we're gonna move towards a close here as well. But I'd be curious to get a sense of what your vision is, though. Let's say with Hera Digital and how, if all the variables around you were in your favor, what would the perfect world look like professionally for your company?
I think for us is we actually want to move, well, we want to do a bit of work in the mission led or purpose driven industry. So we're talking charities, NGOs, or we want to help people, if that makes
Mm,
sense. So if we can help optimize someone's business because they are helping a charity or they are helping educate people on something that is more philanthropical than other than learning about technology and business, that's ultimately, I think, where our purpose sits on a deeper level. Is we made this business to help people, because when we look at industries and we look at professions, dentists are really great at being dentists, bakers are really great at being bakers, but not everyone is made to be a business owner. And when you're forced to be a business owner, that's where the focus starts to dilute. And then the craft as a human, that dilutes. And then therefore your initial care of serving that human has now dissipated and is now no longer enjoyable. So if I can take away that pain for these types of businesses, I think that's a win. I'll die happy.
mm. No, that makes sense. And you guys are focused on, because I'm curious, how does that sort of tie into, let's say, NGOs or sort of social work? Because my understanding is the nature of your business is very much connected to, let's say, SaaS businesses or
Yeah.
services businesses, right?
Yeah.
So how do you sort of extrapolate or potentially identify how more mission driven businesses can use something like what you guys offer?
I met a really good, two really good founders yesterday. So what they did is they've taken the charity industry or the non-for-profit industry and they digitalized it. And what
Mm,
that means is, I'm just as curious as you are, because I was like, what does that mean?
mm,
So they actually, because when we think about donations, we're not really sure where our money goes, and therefore there's
mm,
reluctance to donate in the first place. So, one, it's really about giving visibility of where your donation goes, but then also digitalizing that actual component. So, even though it's in the NGO industry space, it's actually a SaaS product.
mm.
So that's
I see.
how it actually overlaps.
So sort of, and just to again another tangent that I'm going to go into, because a lot of times we heard over the last year that SaaS is dead. Everybody is gonna create their own version of whatever SaaS they want to create. Um, OpenAI is going to rule everything, and they're the one big conglomerate, and so on and so forth. Increasingly, we're seeing that's not true. One person cannot do everything. But my opinion throughout that was, because of the deflation of the cost of producing software, you're going to see 100 new use cases come out now where you can begin to digitize things and begin to create SaaS in industries that were historically untouchable. Like those industries wouldn't even care, because they wouldn't be the ones sitting there, basically creating $1 million projects. Now, if you can create the same thing for like $50,000 or create like a cheap SaaS product around it, there is actually, I think it's gonna grow. Like the overall industry itself is gonna grow with a whole lot more use cases. Do you see something similar happening? And you mentioned you've been meeting founders who have been identifying unique spaces for SaaS products. Do you see this happening?
I don't believe that SaaS is dead, because even if you create, whether you've created it or Microsoft created it, it's still a SaaS product at the end of the day. It's who utilizes that SaaS product and how do software companies actually then to pivot. I think when we look at amalgamation is really the key point. And then you also, as a business owner, as you do when you first download Claude Code, is you go into what we call, and I'm sorry to say this, I'm not sure if this is appropriate, but we call it the crackhead era, where you start to learn what you can really do, and then you're sitting in a dark room on your laptop, trying to figure out how can I do this, and then over time you become overwhelmed. You're like, this is actually not worth my time because I don't have
Yeah.
time to debug it, right? So I think over time you will start to learn as a business owner is this truly worth my time? Because if I'm spending 6 hours creating a SaaS product on my own, yes, it's customizable. Is that I've wasted 6 hours? So technically, that's 600. Let's say you value your hour by $100 for example's sake. That's $600 you've just wasted in a day, where you could be out earning $6,000 talking to customers. So
Hmm.
I think from a lot of people don't see the commercial side of it. I'd much rather pay $20 a month if I don't have to create that SaaS product. But the only lack I see why people think that SaaS is dead is because of lack of integration. So poor N8N and Make maybe have a bit of a problem, but you have to then, just like any industry in any particular growth trajectories, you have to learn to pivot as a business, whether that's pivot completely. And I think going back to Noodle Seed, a very interesting fact is they started off as more of a vibe coding platform, and they pivoted completely 180, went back, reversed back the other direction. And now I think I'm thankful for it because no one else is really doing what Noodle Seed is doing. And that comes from the perspective of we want to serve the people first. And when you create, and I think I keep bringing this up, but when you create a SaaS product because you want to earn money, or two, because you're not prioritizing the end user, then you will create a product just like everybody else that someone can go and vibe code now, and therefore you will not last long commercially. So that's my take on whether a SaaS is dead. I don't think so. I think you have to pivot if you are a SaaS provider, or you have to always operate with the intention of the end user.
Makes sense. And in terms of identifying new untouched avenues for SaaS, do you think there's opportunity there?
I think so. There's so many different little pockets of sub verticals and industries that you could really dive into. And often, I think a key point to identify whether that is an industry worth going into, obviously do your research, but if there's nothing that exists in that space, one, there probably is a good reason why it doesn't exist, because it's probably too hard, or because then you would start to analyze, does that make sense for us to commercially enter? But yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense. Jenny, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I wish you all the very best. I'm excited to see where Australia goes in terms of AI. I know that you're working hard, educating people, and fighting that good fight. Thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing all that insight.
Thank you so much for having us, Muzamil. Was a really great conversation.
And for all of you guys, let me know in the comment section below if you're outside of the North American region. Is there a conversation around AI in your particular region? Do you think the governments, the corporations, the people in the trenches, are they responding to AI? Are they rejecting it? What's the narrative out there? Would love to know in the comment section. But nonetheless, it was same as Muzamil and Zedi. You're watching Beyond the Bubble podcast by Noodle Seed Studios. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.